Today we're going to make brown stock. We'll be using veal bones. The goal that we want to reach is that the stock in the end result will give us a rich brown color. It'll be clear. It will give us a clean taste because stock made from veal bones is considered to be a neutral stock. I'd like to talk about things that we'll need to be successful in reaching this goal, and the first thing is mise en place.
Veal bones for brown stock should have sufficient flesh for good color and flavor. The bones should be 3 to 4 inches in length, fresh, not frozen. Never use bones with a lot of marrow or bones that are large and difficult to cut, such as a knuckle bone. Remember, at high temperatures, marrow will release fat that will come to the surface of the stock. Onions, carrots, and celery are used in the making of the stock. The proper ratio for the CIA mirepoix is 50% onions, 25% carrots, and 25% celery. Sachet d'épices is a cheesecloth bag containing aromatics such as peppercorns, parsley stems, bay leaf, thyme, and garlic. Proper equipment is another important element in the preparation of stocks.
We'll need a French knife, we need a paring knife, a spoon, a ladle, skimmer, a wooden paddle, a chinois. We'll need a small piece of cheesecloth for our sachet d'épices. We'll need some tomato paste and some oil.
Conditioning the pan is the next step in preparing stock. Note that the safe handling of the pan is an important factor in working in a professional kitchen.
Next step that we're going to talk about is conditioning of the pan. Basically what we're talking about is that we put a minimal amount of oil in the pan, put it into a very hot oven. The thing that we're going to do now is we're going to talk about how do you recognize whether the pan is at the proper state of being conditioned. One, we're going to talk about looking at the haze of the pan. When you take the pan out, be very careful, because if you just take it and jerk it, the oil of the pan would be subject to splash out. You could burn your wrists. The oil could go into this area here, and the combustion could start a fire. So it's safety for your own self, safety for the house that you work, so that there isn't a disastrous fire.
Next, place the bones in the conditioned pan and place them in the oven for browning.
There isn't an oven door that's made that is absolutely that tight that nothing escapes. So you'll be able to hear the sizzling of the bones as they recover. And of course, we want a moderate sizzle, not too fast, not too slow. Visually, you may see some of the haze coming out again. I'm going to show you in another oven that I have where I'm roasting bones already. We need to show you that. When you go to turn the bones, you do it as quickly as possible, because we don't want to lose a lot of the heat out of the oven. Once we get the sizzling of the bones that we need, we'll turn the thermostat down if that's what we need to do. Here again, that common sense comes in. We need to talk about the color of the bones, in that the ideal would be doré. a rich golden brown color. We don't want to over roast them because not only will it be too dark, but it will reflect in the flavor and the taste of the stock. You will get that real roasted thing. The tool that we want to use is the skimmer, so that we take the bones to prevent a lot of the fat and the oil that's in the pan of going into the stock. Okay, I'd like to talk about the type of stock pot that we're using. As you can see, it's tall, narrow sides with a small surface. We wouldn't want one that the surface would be very wide and squatty. Reason for that is that when you go to skim the impurities that will rise in the initial stage of its cooking, you can easily remove it. Second, you have the least amount of evaporation because you have a better control over what is happening. So this is the ideal stock pot.
Next, rough chop the onions and the carrots for the mirepoix. Celery is not added at this point because its high moisture content inhibits caramelization and browning. The mirepoix, minus the celery, is placed in the conditioned pan at this point.
Always want to work neat, and rather than to take those vegetables that are on your cutting board and just with your hands put them in there, do as I did. Take them, put them into a pan. The mirepoix now is, as you can hear, is a good speed because we want to caramelize. By caramelizing, we mean the natural sugars that are found in the onions and the carrots, and we want to get a nice rich brown color. I like to address the crust that had adhered to the pan as a result of roasting the bones. During this process, I'm starting to pick up a little bit, but there's still some more that have clung to the bottom of the pan. We refer to that as the fond of the pan. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of tomato paste for flavor and some color. I'm actually going to fry this paste right in with the mirepoix and fat. And once again, we don't want this tomato paste to burn and get black. This is where our sense of smell comes in too. Beautiful aroma. The next step that we're going to show you is deglazing of the pan, done with simple water. You don't need a lot. Our purpose of deglazing is to release these small particles from the bones that we had talked about that still clung to the bottom of the pan, so that we release them from the pan itself. So we don't need a lot of liquid. Notice the color. Not dark. Actually, we have things working for us already. It's a brownish type color. Okay, the deglazing process is finished, and I'm putting it into another pan, and I'm going to save this, which will be used a little bit later.
Pouring water approximately 3 inches over the bones in the stock pot is the next step. After the stock pot is placed on full fire and allowed to come to a boil, simmer at a slow, lazy bubble for at least 3 hours. Skim impurities as they accumulate on the surface.
Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about our sachet d'épices. when you have to deal with dried herbs or spices, that you can contain them into one area of the sachet so that you can remove it at will. It's generally considered as a guideline that when you're using dried spices and herbs, that a maximum of 1 hour to get the optimum extraction. If you cook them too long, your flavors get dull and it goes downhill. So that's the reason why we're controlling this, because we're going to add it at the latter stages of cooking of the stock. Sachet in French means bag. D'épices is spices. Let's talk about cooking of the brown stock.
After the stock has simmered for approximately 3 hours, add the mirepoix and the celery to the stock pot.
Let's talk about the cooking speed of the stock. We want it to be a slow, lazy bubble. The reason why we want it there is for clarity. Because if it goes too fast, if it actually boils, the fat that is on the surface of the stock will then be brought back into the liquid itself, and it's cloudy. There's no excuse for cloudy stocks. The visual judgment that you make, whether the stock is going properly, is that low, slow, lazy simmer. You then take your skimmer, your ladle, and get the impurities off without taking a lot of the stock. If you notice, there is not a lot of stock in the ladle. It's these impurities. We're now going to show you how to wipe the buildup off of the side of the pot with a clean towel or napkin. If you notice, we don't want that to go back into our stock, so that periodically we will be wiping that.
The final steps in the stock making process are straining, cooling, and storing of the stock.
Okay, here we're using the china cap that we showed you before. There's a couple of things that we could do. We could have the cheesecloth right in there. Some chefs prefer to do it this way, and then we're going to transfer it as we pour it into the stainless steel pot. That the other pot will have the cheesecloth. Okay, what we're going to explain to you now is that the cheesecloth has been moistened with just plain cold water, wrung dry. Reason is if you put the cheesecloth on dry, it would tend to slip as the stock is being poured over it. So it will cling to the china cap now. Okay, we're going to talk about cooling off stocks now. Okay, it's important that you have a rack that you can put in the bottom of the sink so that it gives you a little bit of space in between the bottom of the sink so that the cold ice water can get underneath the pot. Things that are necessary now is ice. Cold water. And one thing that you want to remember is that your water has to come up to where the level of stock is. So if your stock is up to here and your water is only down there, obviously half of the pot is out of the cold water and a more difficult time to cool. During the process of the stock cooling, we will take and we will rotate the stock to help the cooling process down. Notice that we're cooling down in stainless steel. We don't want to use plastic for this stage of the cooling. Plastic is a poor way of releasing the heat. It retains the heat. stainless steel will cool the stock down quickly. After the stock is cold, we will then transfer it into the plastic for storage. Okay, an important and effective way of how to store your stocks, how to control it. What you must do is make sure that they're very cold before they go into the refrigerator. I suggest that you have a lid for your plastic container, and then to mark it with a magic marker over a piece of masking tape. So, brown stock and the date. So that you know exactly what it is. So there's no mistake about the rotation of your stocks, because at best, under the ideal conditions, 2 to 3 days they'll last. If you haven't had need for them to be used, then you would take that stock that is 3 days old and you would put it back onto the range and quickly bring it to a boil, skim all the impurities that come as a result of bacteria growth, and then repeat the cooling process again, and then refrigerate it. And then you're okay for another 2-3 days. Let's talk about how we store it in the refrigerator. Of course, we have our label. And what you should do is you should have it neatly arranged. The newer stock should be toward the back of the refrigerator, so that when you go to get the stock, that it would be in the back. So that you're always using your older stocks first.
To summarize, the steps in making brown stock are: 1. Mise en place, including the bones, ingredients for mirepoix, the sachet d'épices, and kitchen equipment. 2. Conditioning the pan. 3. Place bones in the pan and brown in the oven until golden brown or doré. Utilize your senses to determine when the bones are done. 4. Chop the onions and carrots and place in the conditioned pan. Add tomato paste, then deglaze the pan. 5. To the bones in the stock pot, add enough water to cover the bones by approximately 3 inches. 6. Bring the stock to a boil, then simmer for 3 hours at a slow, lazy bubble. Add the mirepoix and simmer for an additional 3 hours. Remove impurities with ladle and napkin during the simmering process. During the last hour of simmering, add the sachet d'épices. 7. Strain, cool, and store the stock in the refrigerator for no more than 3 days. Stocks can be frozen if necessary.